Why didn't she move when the shove came? The impact was deliberate, a shoulder driven with purpose, enough force to send most people stumbling backward, spilling water, losing dignity along with balance. Trays clattered all the time in the mess hall at Camp Richardson. Accidents happened. This wasn't one of them. She absorbed it without flinching. The plastic tray in her hand stayed level. The ice in her cup barely shifted. Her boots adjusted by inches, muscle memory compensating before thought could interfere. She steadied herself with one hand against the counter, not out of weakness, but efficiency. Then she breathed. Slow, controlled. The kind of breath someone takes when they're choosing restraint instead of reaction. Around her, the lunch line hesitated. Marines mid-conversation fell quiet. Forks paused in the air. The sound of the dining facility didn't stop, but it thinned, like everyone felt something change and didn't know why. You don't belong in this line. Staff Sergeant Riley Hutchkins didn't bother lowering his voice. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the moment to carry. He was built like a man used to space opening in front of him. Broad shoulders, rolled sleeves, confidence sharpened into habit. His rank sat comfortably on his chest. His certainty sat even deeper. She turned to face him. No anger, no fear, just blue eyes that had learned long ago how to look at chaos without blinking. "I'm in line for lunch," she said calmly. "The sign says all hands welcome until 1300. It's 12:47. It wasn't what she said that unsettled the room. It was how she said it. Not defensive, not apologetic, measured, like someone correcting a minor procedural error, not challenging authority. Hutchkins laughed, loud, performative, the kind of laugh meant to signal dominance to the two lance corporals behind him, who followed his lead with nervous smirks. He stepped closer, too close. He smelled like gun oil and sweat, range morning, testosterone and irritation layered together. "This chow hall is for Marines," he said, "not tourists, not lost spouses, not people who think rules protect them." Still, she didn't move. That was the first mistake he made. The second came when he decided calm meant weakness. What kind of person stays still when being threatened? The question flickered through more than one mind in the room, though no one said it out loud. She listened as he spoke, let him spend himself, let him escalate. He talked about sacrifice, about warriors, about earning the right to be there, about how she looked like someone who had never worked a hard day in her life. Each word was meant to land like a blow. None of them did. Inside, something tightened, not anger, not yet, disappointment maybe, the familiar ache of seeing the same pattern repeat itself. She had seen men like him before, loud certainty built on fragile foundations, rank mistaken for worth, power mistaken for permission. When he grabbed her arm, the room went cold. It wasn't violent in the way movies make violence loud and obvious. It was controlled, possessive, fingers digging into fabric with intent. That was when several Marines straightened in their seats. She didn't pull away. She grounded her weight instead, centered herself. Years of training, not in dominance but in control, made her immovable. Hutchkins pulled. Nothing. Pulled harder. Still nothing. Confusion cracked his expression, just for a second. People were watching now, really watching. A private whispered, "Is she not moving?" Someone else swallowed hard. She met Hutchkins' eyes, not with challenge, with certainty. "You should stop," she said quietly. He mistook it for a threat. It was. It was a warning. Why did the room feel like it was holding its breath? Hutchkins reached for his radio. That familiar security blanket, authority distilled into plastic and static. Military police would fix this. They always did. Before he keyed the mic, her posture changed. Barely perceptible, shoulders back, spine straightened. The kind of shift you only notice if you've been trained to notice danger. I suggest you reconsider, she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Something in it bypassed rank and went straight to instinct. The room felt smaller, quieter, as if gravity itself leaned in to listen. You are demonstrating, she continued, a misunderstanding of leadership, and you are doing it in front of your Marines. That word you're hung heavy. His thumb hovered, trembled. A lance corporal at the back of the room felt a chill crawl up his spine and didn't know why. Then she said it. Not her name, not her rank. Her truth. You confuse domination with command. The radio lowered before Hutchins realized he'd done it. Across the room, a young Marine named Westbrook stared at her wrist. The black memorial bracelet. The bearing. The face from the briefing slide. Oh no, he whispered. And then louder, oh no. What happens when power finally recognizes itself? Leadership arrived fast after that. Too fast for excuses. The moment Lieutenant Colonel Chun walked through the doors, the space snapped to attention. Command Sergeant Major Torres followed like gravity made flesh. Hutchins tried to speak, tried to explain. No one let him. The colonel turned to the woman in gray. General Reeves, he said. The name rippled through the room like a shockwave. She nodded once. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just acknowledgement. As she walked out, Marines tracked her with stunned eyes, not because she had one, because she had never needed to fight. What does accountability look like when no one is spared? The investigation was thorough, relentless, fair. 47 statements. No embellishment, no spectacle. Hutchins' career unraveled not in an explosion, but in quiet, documented truth. Reduced in rank, reassigned, watched. And he accepted it. Because somewhere between the dishwashing station and the weekly meetings with the command sergeant major, something changed. Not humiliation. Perspective. Why do some lessons require silence to be learned? General Reeves addressed him once more, not to punish. To explain. A warrior, she said, protects dignity, especially when no one is watching. He cried then, not because he was caught, but because he understood. And as she left, the room felt lighter. Not because justice had spoken, but because restraint had. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't wear rank or raise its voice. Sometimes dignity simply stands its ground and waits for the world to catch up. Why did her calm feel heavier than his anger? The dining facility didn't know how to process silence like this. Marines were trained to respond to volume, commands barked, orders shouted over engines and gunfire. But her calm wasn't empty. It was dense. It pressed down on the room in a way raised voices never could. Hutchins stood inches from her now, close enough that his shadow swallowed the edge of her tray. He expected her to shrink. People always did at this distance. They smelled his confidence before they saw his rank. They read the room and stepped aside. She didn't. Inside her chest, something old stirred. Not rage, not fear, a memory. A familiar crossroads she had stood at many times before, when reacting would feel good for a moment but restraint would matter longer. She had learned painfully that power wasted on ego left nothing behind but regret. "Sergeant," she said again, quietly, "step back." The words were simple, no embellishment, no threat. They landed like a slap. Hutchins' jaw tightened. This wasn't how the script went. Civilians argued, spouses cried, contractors complained to officers later. They didn't issue instructions. Behind him, one of the lance corporals shifted his weight, discomfort creeping into his posture. The laughter from earlier had died. Something about this felt wrong now, and he couldn't explain why. "You don't get to tell me what to do," Hutchins snapped. "Not here, not anywhere." He gestured broadly, pulling the room back into it. "You see this," he said loudly. This is what entitlement looks like, walking into a Marine chow hall like it's a coffee shop. A few Marines glanced down at their trays. No one laughed this time. She felt it, the collective unease. The room wasn't on his side anymore. It wasn't on hers either. It was waiting, watching, measuring. And she hated that part. Because she hadn't come here to teach a lesson. She had come to eat lunch. There was a quiet sadness in that realization, the kind that settled in her ribs. 20 years of service, of command, of responsibility, and still, moments like this found her. Still, the burden of restraint fell on the one most capable of ending it quickly. She thought of the trail she'd run that morning, the cold air, the rhythm of her breath, the rare anonymity of moving through the world unseen. She'd wanted one normal hour, one moment without salutes or expectations. Instead, she was here. Hutchins reached for her arm again. That was when something inside her locked. Not anger, resolve. His hand closed around her sleeve, fingers digging in with ownership. The fabric bunched. The contact was brief, but intentional. The room froze. She felt the pressure, the intent behind it, and cataloged it clinically. Grip strength, angle, balance. The man didn't know it, but he was touching someone who had survived worse hands in worse places. Someone who had learned how to make moments like this end without spectacle. She didn't pull away. She adjusted her stance. Her feet shifted, widening just enough to anchor her weight. Her center dropped. 1,000 small corrections aligned in silence. Hutchins pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled again, harder this time. His boots scraped against the polished floor. The counter rattled faintly. A murmur rippled through the room. What the hell? She's not moving. His face flickered, confusion breaking through confidence. He wasn't used to resistance that didn't fight back. Move, he growled. She looked at his hand on her arm. Then back at his face. Remove your hand, she said. Not louder. Sharper. Something in her voice cut through him. For a fraction of a second, instinct overrode ego. His grip loosened before his mind caught up. That second mattered. He released her and stepped back, chest heaving now, not from exertion alone, but from something else. Fear, maybe, or the unsettling realization that the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he'd believed. She smoothed the sleeve of her pullover where his fingers had been, a small, deliberate act, not to hide anything, but to signal that the moment had passed, that she was still in control. You are escalating a situation that does not require it, she said calmly, and you are doing so publicly. Hutchins laughed again, but it sounded hollow this time, forced. Publicly, he scoffed. You made it public when you decided to mouth off. One of the Marines seated near the window swallowed hard. He had watched combat footage in briefing rooms. He had heard silence like this before, right before something irreversible happened. Hutchins grabbed his radio. Across the room, Westbrook's stomach dropped. No, not yet. The woman saw the movement and knew what it meant. She had seen this pivot before, the moment when a leader, cornered by their own behavior, reached for procedure to justify instinct. I suggest you don't, she said. The radio hovered midair. Hutchins sneered. You don't get to suggest anything to me. Her eyes hardened, not with anger but with certainty. You are about to make this worse, she said, for yourself and for them. She didn't gesture, didn't look around. But somehow, everyone knew who them meant. You're Marines. That was when Hutchins' voice dropped. He leaned in, close enough that only she could hear him clearly. You think you're smarter than me, he whispered. You think quoting regs makes you untouchable. She met his gaze steadily. I think, she said softly, that you don't realize who you're standing in front of. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Then pride crushed it. I don't care who you are, he said. This ends now. He raised the radio, and somewhere deep in the dining facility, a young lance corporal felt his chest tighten, not because he knew what was coming, but because he sensed that whatever happened next would follow him for the rest of his career. She straightened fully now. No more blending in. No more shrinking her presence. The air changed, not dramatically, subtly, like a pressure system shifting before a storm. Her voice, when she spoke again, carried something unmistakable. "Command. Staff Sergeant Hutchins," she said evenly. "Lower the radio." His thumb froze. The words weren't loud. They were absolute. Every Marine in the room felt it, even if they couldn't name it. The tone that cut through chaos. The voice you obeyed before thinking because hesitation cost lives. Hutchins' hand trembled. "Who are you?" he demanded, the question breaking through despite himself. She didn't answer. Not yet. Because some truths carried more weight when revealed by consequence instead of declaration. And as the seconds stretched, as the radio remained silent, as the room held its breath, the balance of power began to shift, not with force but with restraint. And no one there would ever forget the feeling of watching it happen. Why did no one step in when the balance finally tipped? The radio stayed raised, frozen between intention and consequence. Hutchins' thumb hovered over the transmit button, knuckle whitening. The room had slipped into that rare, dangerous quiet where everyone senses history being written, but no one wants to be the one who moves first. She could feel it, the tension pulling tight across the space like a wire drawn too far. Inside her chest, a different battle unfolded. This was the moment she always dreaded, not the confrontation itself. That part was easy. It was the reveal, the loss of anonymity, the way truth once spoken could never be taken back. She had worn many uniforms in her life, some visible, some carried only in posture and habit. Here in this mess hall she had chosen the quiet one. And now it was slipping. She thought of the reasons she'd kept it hidden. The weight of rank, the distance it created, the way people stopped being honest when they learned who you were. She had wanted to see the base as it truly was, not through briefings or filtered reports but through lived experience. To eat where they ate, to listen without being noticed. That choice had brought her here. Hutchins cleared his throat, trying to reclaim the moment. "Military police," he said, forcing confidence back into his voice, "are on their way." A lie. But no one challenged it. Across the room, a corporal slowly stood, unsure why he was doing it. Instinct, maybe. The sense that remaining seated felt wrong somehow. He didn't salute, didn't speak. He just stood. Then another followed. Then another. Not in solidarity, not in rebellion. In recognition. Something about her bearing, now fully revealed, had triggered a response deeper than rank. A memory coded into muscle and bone. This was what authority looked like when it wasn't trying to prove itself. Hutchins noticed the movement and panicked. "Sit down," he barked. No one did. She let the silence stretch. Let him feel it. Let the room finish deciding without her interference. "Staff Sergeant," she said finally, her voice low but steady, "this conversation is over." He laughed sharply, the sound brittle. "You don't get to end it." She stepped forward. Not into his space, but into the center of the room. Every eye followed. When she spoke again, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room leaned toward her. "You are correct about one thing," she said. "I do not belong to you. I never did." She paused, let that land. "And neither do they." Her gaze moved, not accusing, not dramatic, simply acknowledging the Marines who watched her now. Young faces, tired ones, men and women who carried more than their age should allow. "This facility exists to sustain the force," she continued. "Not to enforce ego, not to humiliate, and not to excuse behavior that undermines trust." Hutchins' face flushed, You think you can lecture me? No, she replied. I think you need to listen. That was when Westbrook spoke. His voice cracked despite his effort to steady it. Staff Sergeant, he said, barely above a whisper, maybe we should. Hutchins rounded on him. Shut up. The word echoed too loudly. She turned to Westbrook then, met his eyes. You did the right thing, she said. Just that. The effect was immediate. Westbrook straightened, breath catching. A nod of acknowledgement passed between them, not hierarchical but human, the kind of moment that rewired something inside a young Marine's understanding of leadership. Hutchins saw it happen and realized too late that he had lost the room. You don't know me, he snapped at her, desperation bleeding through. You don't know what I've done. She looked at him, not with judgment but with clarity. I know enough, she said, and so do they. She reached into her pocket slowly, deliberately, every movement measured, visible. No sudden gestures, no room for misinterpretation. Hutchins tensed. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. Orders. She didn't open them, didn't read from them, she didn't need to. She simply held them in her hand. That alone was enough. A murmur swept the room now, not whispers but realization. Marines had seen that paper before, not that exact one but its kind, the weight of authority without performance. Hutchins' radio crackled suddenly. Staff Sergeant Hutchins, a voice came through, sharp and unmistakable. Where are you? His mouth opened. No sound came out. She met his eyes one last time, not triumphant, almost regretful. Answer, she said. He raised the radio with shaking hands. Mess hall, he muttered. Incident. There was a pause on the other end. Then, stay where you are. The finality in the voice left no room for interpretation. Hutchins lowered the radio slowly. The fight drained out of him, not in a collapse but in a quiet unraveling. He looked smaller somehow, not diminished by her but by his own choices finally catching up. She exhaled softly. The tension eased, but something heavier settled in its place. Responsibility, the aftermath. She turned to the room. Return to your meals, she said. We'll handle this. No one moved at first. Then chairs scraped, trays lifted. Conversation returned, not loud, not normal, but cautious, respectful. As if everyone understood they had witnessed something they didn't yet have words for. Command arrived minutes later. The lieutenant colonel first, jaw tight, eyes scanning. The command sergeant major right behind him, presence filling the doorway. The moment they saw her, both snapped to attention. Ma'am, they said in unison. The room went still again. Hutchins stared. The realization hit him not like a blow, but like gravity. She nodded once, at ease. They complied instantly. That single exchange said everything he hadn't wanted to believe. As the command team took control, as quiet instructions were given and Hutchins was escorted away, she felt the familiar ache settle into her shoulders. The cost of stepping forward, the loss of the quiet hour she'd wanted so badly. She picked up her tray again. The food was cold now. She didn't mind. As she walked toward an empty table near the back, Marines subtly shifted to make space, not crowding, not starring. Respectful distance. She sat alone. For a moment she allowed herself to feel it all, the frustration, the sadness, the weight of knowing this wasn't an isolated incident, but a mirror held up to something larger. She took a bite, chewed slowly. Across the room, Westbrook caught her eye again. He nodded just once. She returned it. Not as a general. As someone who had been where he was. And as the mess hall slowly returned to its rhythm, one truth lingered in the air, quiet but unmistakable. Leadership wasn't about being seen. It was about what remained after the moment passed. And nothing would feel quite the same here again. Why did the quiet afterward feel heavier than the confrontation itself? The mess hall emptied in layers, not all at once. Marines finished their meals more slowly now, conversations subdued, eyes occasionally drifting toward the back corner where she sat alone. No one stared for long. It wasn't fear. It was respect mixed with uncertainty. The kind that followed moments you knew would be talked about later, reshaped into lessons and warnings and half-remembered truths. She stayed seated long after her tray was empty. Cold food didn't bother her. Silence did. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that carried expectation. She could feel it pressing in from every direction, even as the room thinned out. This was the cost she never put in reports, the aftermath no one prepared you for. Command Sergeant Major Torres approached without ceremony. No entourage, no posturing. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said quietly, not saluting, "if you'd prefer privacy, we can clear the room." She shook her head. "No, let them finish." He studied her for a moment. He had served under generals who demanded space, demanded spectacle. This one didn't. That told him more than any ribbon rack could. "They're shaken," he said carefully, "not in a bad way." She nodded. "They should be." He waited, then asked, "Do you want to speak to them?" The question landed heavier than he intended. She considered it. The instinct to address the room was strong, to explain, to contextualize, to soften what had happened with words. But she knew better. "No," she said, "they'll hear enough voices today." Torres nodded. He understood. Sometimes the most powerful statement was absence. When he left, she finally stood. The simple act drew attention again, not because she demanded it, but because people felt it. Her movements were economical. No wasted energy. Years of command refined into quiet efficiency. As she carried her tray to the return station, a young Marine stepped aside quickly, almost too quickly, then flushed in embarrassment. She met his eyes and gave a small nod. "Carry on," she said gently. The relief on his face was immediate. Outside, the afternoon air hit her like a reset, cooler, sharper. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the present. The base moved around her, vehicles idling, boots on pavement, the low hum of operational life continuing as it always did. But she felt the shift. Word was already moving faster than she could walk. She didn't head back to headquarters. Instead, she took the long way, past motor pools, past training fields, places where truth lived unfiltered. A pair of Marines paused mid-conversation as she passed. One whispered, "That's her." She pretended not to hear. This was the part she hated most, becoming a symbol instead of a person. At the edge of the training area, she stopped, watched a squad running drills. The cadence was slightly off. The instructor overcorrected. Voices rose. She didn't intervene. She never did unless it mattered. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. One message. From Hutchins. She stared at the name longer than she meant to. He wasn't supposed to have her contact. Someone had given it to him. Someone always did. The message was short. "I didn't know." She exhaled slowly. Ignorance was easy. Accountability was harder. She typed, then deleted, typed again. Finally, she sent 3 words. "Knowing isn't enough." She slid the phone back into her pocket and kept walking. The meeting that followed wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no grandstanding. Just facts. Hutchins sat rigid at the conference table, eyes fixed forward. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, but something fundamental had cracked. He wasn't angry anymore. He was afraid. She took her seat at the head of the table, not because she needed to, but because protocol demanded it now. The colonel briefed. The sergeant major added context. Statements were read. Video footage played without commentary. She listened. That was her strength, not talking, listening long enough for truth to surface on its own. When it was her turn, she didn't speak about rank or rules. She spoke about trust. "You are entrusted," she said evenly, "with shaping the culture of those below you. Every interaction teaches them something, whether you intend it to or not." Hutchkin swallowed. "This was not about a mess hall," she continued. "It was about who felt safe to exist in a shared space." No one interrupted. "When leaders humiliate," she said, "they don't create discipline, they create silence, and silence gets people hurt." She paused. "I am not interested in punishment that teaches nothing," she said, "but I am not willing to excuse behavior that erodes the foundation we rely on." Hutchkins finally looked up. His voice when he spoke was raw. "I thought authority meant control." She met his gaze steadily. "Authority," she said, "means responsibility." The words hung there, no flourish, no anger. Just truth. Later, alone in her office, she removed the jacket she'd worn all day, set it carefully over the chair. The mirror on the wall caught her reflection. For a moment, she didn't see a general. She saw a young lieutenant in a desert fob being talked over in briefings, being tested unnecessarily, learning, painfully, when to speak and when to endure. She closed her eyes. Progress was never linear. Culture didn't change in declarations. It shifted in moments like this, messy, uncomfortable, necessary. Her phone vibrated again. This time, a different name. "Westbrook." "Ma'am," the message read, hesitant even in text. "I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know I was allowed to speak." She felt a tightness in her chest. She replied without hesitation. "You always were." She set the phone down and leaned back in her chair. Outside her window, the base lights flickered on as dusk settled in. Tomorrow there would be questions, rumors, opinions. Tonight there was only reflection, and a quiet certainty that something small but real had shifted. Not because power had spoken loudly, but because restraint had held its ground. Why did the night feel heavier than the day ever had? Sleep didn't come easily. It never did after moments like this. The base settled into its nighttime rhythm. Lights dimmed, engines quieted, footsteps softened. But her mind refused to follow. She lay still in the dark, staring at a ceiling she'd stared at in dozens of duty stations before, each one carrying its own memories, its own unfinished echoes. This wasn't supposed to stay with her like this. It had been handled, professionally, by the book clean. And yet, she rolled onto her side, the sheets whispering softly. Her body was tired in the deep, honest way that came from long days and longer years. But exhaustion didn't touch the part of her that stayed awake, the part that replayed moments not for regret, but for meaning. The shove, the silence, the way the room had leaned toward her before it understood why. She had spent her career learning how to make decisions under pressure, decisions measured in seconds, sometimes fractions of them. Lives balanced on judgment calls that never made headlines. She had learned to live with those outcomes. What unsettled her now wasn't doubt. It was memory. She sat up slowly and reached for the glass of water on the nightstand. Her hand moved automatically, steady as ever. She drank, then held the glass for a moment longer than necessary, feeling the coolness ground her. There had been a time when she might have reacted differently. That truth surfaced uninvited. Years ago, another base, another mess hall, she had been younger, sharper-edged, still learning how to exist in spaces that didn't expect her. A comment then. A shove, not unlike today. She had responded with words that burned bridges instead of building them. She had been right. And still she had lost. The memory didn't hurt anymore, but it had shaped her. Taught her that winning an argument didn't always mean winning the moment. That authority wielded without restraint could leave scars just as deep as silence. She stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the base stretched under the moonlight, orderly, functional, alive even in rest. Somewhere out there, Marines were on watch. Others slept. Some stared at ceilings, carrying their own versions of today. She wondered what Hutchins was doing right now. Probably not sleeping either. She didn't feel satisfaction at that thought, only responsibility. Leadership meant living with the consequences of what you allowed and what you stopped. It meant carrying other people's mistakes without letting them define you. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk. Another message. This one from Command Sergeant Major Torres. Ma'am, just wanted you to know word's spreading, not gossip, reflection. She read it twice, then replied, good, let it settle. She set the phone down and returned to bed, though she knew rest would still be shallow. When sleep finally came, it wasn't peaceful. The next morning broke clear and sharp. Physical training was already underway when she stepped onto the track. She wore no insignia beyond what regulation required. No entourage, just her and the quiet insistence of routine. She ran because it reminded her that leadership began with keeping pace, sometimes ahead, sometimes alongside, but never above effort itself. As she ran, Marines noticed her. Not immediately. First, just a presence, a rhythm that matched theirs too easily. Then recognition dawned, slow, careful, unsure. A few adjusted their pace unconsciously. She didn't acknowledge it. She finished her run, cooled down, and stretched beneath the same sky as everyone else. Sweat cooled on her skin. Breath steadied. For a moment, she was just another body pushing against gravity. That was the balance she fought to protect. Later that morning, she sat in on a junior leader development session, unannounced, unintroduced. She took a seat in the back. The instructor, a young captain, stiffened when he noticed her, but she gave a subtle shake of her head. Continue. The topic was authority. Perfect timing. The captain spoke about responsibility, about presence, about earning trust. His words were solid, well-researched, earnest. But when the discussion opened, silence followed. No one wanted to be the first to speak. She watched the room carefully, saw the hesitation, the calculation, young leaders weighing honesty against safety. Finally, a corporal raised his hand. Sir, he said carefully, sometimes authority feels like pressure, like you have to be loud to be heard. A few heads nodded. The captain opened his mouth to respond. She spoke instead. You don't, she said. The room turned. She stood slowly, meeting their eyes one by one. No intimidation, no performance. Volume isn't authority, she continued. Consistency is. She paused. People follow what they trust, and trust is built quietly. She looked around the room. If someone only listens when you raise your voice, she said, you never really had their respect. No one spoke. She nodded once, then sat back down. The captain swallowed and continued the session, visibly recalibrating. When it ended, no one rushed out. They lingered, thoughtful, changed in ways that wouldn't show up on evaluations. As she left, the corporal who had spoken earlier caught up to her. Ma'am, he said, nervous but determined, yesterday I was there. She stopped and faced him fully. Yes. I didn't know what to do, he admitted. I froze. She studied him for a moment. Freezing doesn't mean failing, she said. It means you care about getting it right. He nodded, relief flickering across his face. You'll know what to do next time, she added, because now you've seen it. He stood straighter. Yes, ma'am. As she walked away, she felt something ease inside her. Not pride. Hope. That afternoon, Hutchins requested a meeting. Not through command channels. Directly. She considered declining. Then accepted. He arrived early, stood when she entered, didn't speak until she did. She gestured for him to sit. I'm not here to argue, he said immediately, or to defend myself. She waited. I keep thinking about the look on their faces, he continued. My Marines, when you spoke. He shook his head. I didn't recognize myself in that moment. She folded her hands calmly. That's not the worst realization a leader can have. He looked up. What's the worst? Realizing it and doing nothing about it, she said. He nodded slowly. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. She considered him. You don't fix it, she said. You live differently. Silence settled between them. I'll accept whatever comes, he said quietly. She met his gaze. Then make sure it's worth something, she replied. When he left, she remained seated, staring at the door long after it closed. Not every story ended cleanly, but some began again. And as the base carried on around her, training, routine, quiet resilience, she felt certain of one thing. Change didn't arrive with force. It arrived when someone finally chose to listen. Why did the morning feel lighter, even though nothing had been erased? The base woke the way it always did, without ceremony. Engines coughed to life. Boots struck pavement. Orders were given, received, executed. From the outside, nothing marked the day as different from any other. But she felt it. Not relief, not victory. Alignment. She stood on the balcony outside her quarters, coffee cooling in her hands, watching the early light stretch across the motor pool. For years, she had measured days by outcomes, missions completed, risks mitigated, losses avoided. This morning felt different. It wasn't about what had been done. It was about what would no longer be tolerated. That distinction mattered. She finished the coffee and set the mug down untouched. Some habits never left you, neither did some instincts. She reached for her jacket, paused, then left it behind. Rank had its place. Today, presence mattered more. She walked. Past offices where staff worked quietly. Past young Marines who straightened, then relaxed when she nodded first. Past bulletin boards already carrying whispers of yesterday, not rumors but questions. The right kind. She entered the small chapel near the edge of the base and sat in the back pew. She wasn't there to pray. She was there to listen. The space held stories, loss, hope, apologies never spoken aloud. She had sat in chapels like this after notifying families, after flights that returned with empty seats, after decisions that could not be undone. It was where she went when answers weren't required, only honesty. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the mess hall, she let herself feel tired. Not the physical fatigue she had trained her body to carry, the deeper one, the kind that came from holding standards when it would be easier to look away, from being the one who stepped forward so others wouldn't have to. She breathed it in, then let it go. When she opened her eyes, someone was standing in the doorway. Westbrook. He froze when he realized he'd been seen. Sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean to. It's fine, she said gently. You can come in. He hesitated, then stepped inside, removing his cover out of habit. He didn't sit immediately. Uncertainty still lived in his posture. You're not in trouble, she added. I know, he said quickly. Then after a pause, I think. She smiled faintly. Sit. He did. They sat in silence for a moment, not awkward, just unhurried. I keep thinking about yesterday, he finally said, about how fast it all happened. She nodded. It always does. I always thought strength meant stepping in, doing something big. He swallowed, but you didn't. She turned slightly to face him. I did exactly what was needed. He frowned, thinking, you let him show everyone who he was. And I trusted everyone else to see it, she said. He nodded slowly. I think I get it. She watched him closely, not evaluating, understanding. Remember this, she said. There will be moments when you want to react because it feels right, and moments when restraint feels unbearable. Choose the one that leaves the fewest people smaller afterward. He absorbed that. Yes, ma'am. When he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. Thank you, he said, for not making us feel stupid for not knowing what to do. She met his eyes. No one is born knowing. After he left, she stayed a while longer. Then she rose. The announcement came that afternoon. Brief, unembellished, delivered through proper channels. Staff Sergeant Hutchkins was relieved of his current duties pending reassignment and corrective leadership training. No spectacle, no public condemnation. Some expected more. She expected enough. Leadership wasn't about destroying someone to prove a point. It was about making sure the point endured. Not everyone agreed. Emails came, quiet conversations followed, opinions formed and collided. She listened. She always did. That evening she stood before a group of senior leaders, men and women who had survived wars, budgets, politics, and time. They didn't need lessons, but they needed reminders. This wasn't about rank, she said calmly. It was about culture. One of them leaned forward. With respect, ma'am, some think you could have avoided it by identifying yourself earlier. She didn't bristle. That's true, she said, and then we would have learned nothing. Silence followed. Another spoke. You embarrassed him. She met his gaze evenly. No, he embarrassed himself. I simply didn't interrupt. The distinction settled slowly. She continued. If our authority only functions when announced, then it isn't authority, it's theater. No one argued that. When the meeting ended, there were no handshakes, no affirmations. Just understanding. On her final morning at the base, she returned to the mess hall. Not for symbolism. For breakfast. The line moved normally. Conversations hummed. Someone laughed near the back. Someone complained about the eggs. Life uninterrupted. No one shoved her. No one challenged her presence. But something else happened. As she reached the counter, a Marine stepped aside, not abruptly, not fearfully, simply aware, respectful. Morning, ma'am, he said quietly. She nodded, morning. She sat where she had before, same table, same corner. No one stared this time. A few nodded, a few smiled. One young Marine caught her eye, then looked away quickly, embarrassed. She smiled to herself. She ate slowly. And for the first time since arriving at the base, she felt invisible again. Not because she had shrunk, but because the space no longer needed her to prove anything. When she stood to leave, she paused. Not because anyone asked her to speak. Because she wanted to. She turned, voice calm but carrying. One thing, she said. The room quieted, not completely, just enough. You don't owe leadership your silence, she continued, and leadership doesn't owe you fear. She looked around. If you protect each other's dignity, she said, you protect the mission. That was all. She left her tray, walked out. Outside, the sky stretched wide and open. The base moved on behind her, stronger not because it had been corrected, but because it had been seen. As she headed toward her vehicle, she felt no triumph. Only peace. Not because she had outranked everyone watching, but because she had reminded them, and herself, that the most enduring authority never needs to announce itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't shove back. It doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes dignity simply stands still long enough for the truth to reveal itself, and then walks away, leaving the world just a little more aligned than it found it.